Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are in the middle of page 1251, Aleph Resh Nun Aleph. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along the text. And we now have entered the third level of Aliyas HaMalchus, after speaking about Biti and Achesi. Biti being my daughter, which is Malchus as an estate, the first state of elevation as a recipient of Zah. The example of a servant serving God with Kabbalah sale, just by acceptance, does not need to understand, doesn't know the reasons, follows orders. Achesi is the next elevation of the Malchus to the level of sister. So a sister is a sibling to Zah. And here the Chochmah and Binah comes into play because Achesi is receiving from the Meichin, and what that is in Aved is like the Tanoim and Amoraim, the Poskim, that actually use their minds as advisors and ministers of the king, to use their minds to understand and interpret and develop and the laws of the land, in this case, halachas of Torah Shebal Peh. So that's the level of Achesi. And we learned yesterday in the parentheses, the discussion on exactly where's this level of Tanoim Amoraim. Is it in Atzilus? Is it in Biyah? And he concluded that it's Atzilus within Biyah. So there's the neshamas of Biyah, which are more like servants. There's the neshamas of the Tanoim Amoraim, Atzilus within Biyah, that are part of, like he said, they become part of Malchus. They encompassed in Malchus, which gets from Yesod. And then there's even higher levels, which he didn't discuss in detail. Now we began, what about Imi? The third level of elevation is now not just that it's an equal to Zah, but it's going to be mashpia into Zah. And he began neshamas in l'mayla mahatera. They're higher than the Torah, and they're mashpia in Torah. And to explain that, he began explaining firstly what is the basic understanding of the level of Torah, the nigla dika Torah haniglis, which he calls piskei hamidus. All the psukim, all the rulings of what is kosher and puzzle, what is tamei and toyer, pure and impure, and what is chayiv and zakeh, guilty or innocent, or merited, which is all in the midas, because chesed, like he said, kosher, mutter, and toher, all is in the category of chesed and yamin mikareves, something that yamin with the right, with the right side chesed brings us close, means it's allowed to be done. It has the ability, like he says, when it's kosher, when it's pure, and it's merited, you can elevate those sparks to alakus. Or the other side is gvura, apostle, asr, v'tameh, who bechinas agvura, the smell decha that you're supposed to avoid, and its bitter is through refraining, not from engaging, but refraining. And because you can't elevate those sparks on their own, the bitter is idei tchiyah dafke, muter v'asur. So we see that the Torah haniglis, the revealed Torah's halacha, is structured, like he says, in the world of piskei hamidus. It's the moichin hashayach halamidus. Because now you need to know, how do you determine if something is kosher or not? And the same with the other rulings, that you need the mind to work. You need to learn Torah. You have to delve into it, immerse yourself with the mind, analyze, which is what you do in Gemara. What are the Tanoim and Amoraim doing? They're discussing and arguing and counter-arguing and bringing proofs, and then there's the counter-proofs, back and forth, back and forth. It's all an intellectual journey into trying to understand what is the right halacha, the right ruling. Is it allowed to be, can it be elevated or cannot be elevated? Elevated meaning, can it be elevated directly or has to be done through tchiyah, by avoiding it? So that is Torah Sanigla. And that's what defines, he says, V'zeu shein shisha sidrei Mishnah. These are the 6 sections of Torah, which correspond to the 6 midas, shisha midas al yenis. V'kol zehu al pi ha'chochmah shebetorah shezeh yeh kosher v'zeh yeh apostle. And all this is according to the chochmah. This isn't just we receive the laws from Hashem. Hashem said, you, meaning the human beings, Torah leba shamayim, Torah is not in heaven. You down below will use the Torah, the written Torah that I've given you, and the Yud Gimel Midrash Torah Dreshes Behem, the 13 methodologies of how we analyze and evaluate Torah law. And you will determine with that seichel what's that this is going to be kosher and this is going to be not kosher, puzzle. And here's the main qualification, is not chachma be'etzem, it's not fundamental, the cognitive on its highest level, it's levad. In other words, is the mind as it relates to determining an actual legal ruling, whether chesed or gvura. In language of Kabbalah, and you used this expression earlier as well. The nehi of ima, the lowest levels of binah, not the atzmias binah. Remember, we talked about the mother that hovers over her children, over the midas. That's how binah relates to the midas. So here the meichin is not just learning Torah like yagdal Torah v'yadir, just to understand godliness or understand God's will, but rather you're learning in order to determine which is the right ruling. So it's a moichin, it is moichin, and it's deep moichin, but it's moichin as it relates to rulings that how to govern the world and how to govern our behavior in this world. That's called moichin hashayach on the midas. I remember he brought the nehi. I'm looking where it was, probably on page 1248. Okay, nehi. So what he says is like this. So this is nehi de ima nasem meichin lezah, ubetechem islabes bechinas netzach v'hei de abba. We read this already, but I'm going to review it from here. So middle of the page, the line begins meichin lezah, and in this meichin of zah, which is getting from nehi of binah, nehi is always the lower levels. You could say the actionable or behavioral levels of binah. So binah can be, you can sit and learn something and completely be immersed in an idea, and then the conclusion of that idea, which is the nehi of binah, leads you into meichin of midas, but the nehi of binah has netzach of haid of chachma too, of abba. So you have chachma in there, the nekuda of chachma, but the lower level of netzach and haid, again, the lower levels that relate to the next level, that is mislabish, and that is enclosed within nehi netzach haid yesed of binah, which in turn becomes the moichin, the intellect, the mind of zah, of the midas, of kosher and apostle, of chesed and gvura, and so on. That's where we stopped. So now he's going to continue, and after we understand moichin shaykh lemidas, which is achesi, what we're learning now, the sister, we're going to come back to what is imi. That's mashpia in Torah, which is going to be higher than just Torah as it relates to these halachas and nigla, as we'll see shortly. So he says like, ach, now however, zehu shemisalmen bebchinis nehi de'ima. The netzach haid of Abba and Chachma are not in a revealed and an expansive fashion. They're concealed in there. It's just like when you're thinking of an idea, when you're developing an idea in Binah, the nekuda, the spark of Chachma is in there, but it's not necessarily in a revealed way. Is the kernel, it's like the seed, that the core essential point is there. But now the same thing he's saying here, that the nehi, the way that's a chayd of chachma. Though chachma is such a high level, so besides being the lowest level of netzach and hay, the lower levels of chachma, they're also concealed within b'chinas nehi de'ima, u'kiyedu the nehi u'b'chinas levush hamaylim. As it's known that nehi in general is a garment that conceals. So let me explain that for a moment. When we talk about midas, we talk about chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach, hayd, yesod, malchus. Now, there's times we talk about them as equal 7 emotions, like in the Sfiras Eimer. We count the Eimer, so every week focuses on one of these 7. Week 1 is chesed, chesed sheba chesed, gvura sheba chesed, teferes sheba chesed, and so on. Week 2 is gvura, week 3 is netzach, is teferes, week 4 is netzach, week 5 is hayd, week 6 is yesod, and week 7 is malchus. Like the 7 days of the week, chesed through malchus. But when you really break it down, there are times we talk about chagas and nihi, not just as 7 equal emotions, we talk about them as nihi being more the behavioral, the actionable part of chagas. In Tanya, Ger Sakedesh, Simen Chav Hey, I believe, Is it Chafei or Tezvov? One of the sections, he talks about this and says that Nehi is more the midas as they already relate more on an actionable or behavioral level to another. So chesed can be, I have love in my heart. And yes, love is only possible when you have another person to love, but it is the lower levels of netzach that corresponds to chesed, and hoy that corresponds to gvura, and yesod that corresponds to teferes, right, left, and center, that really bring it down and manifest it. In Ageres HaKedesh, she also says that netzach and hoid is the part, the kloyes yeyitzes. That's the part of how basically means is the kidneys that advise. They're like the advisory element where they're already looking at how to channel the midas into something of action. So in general, nihi, in this context, when you say the nihi of any level, you're speaking about its lower expression, and it's always going to be a concealer, because when you have the intensity of chesed, gvura, teferes, that very intensity of your passionate love is not always easy to bring into action because it's so intense. So in a sense, it goes through, I don't want to say the word tzimtzum, he calls it a levush hamaylim. So when you say that netzach and hoid, of, like he says here, that the netzach of hoid, that in the meichin of zah, which is coming from the nihi of ima, that's already nihi, which in it is manifest the netzach and hoid of abba, says that misalmin b'bchinas nihi de ima, they conceal because nihi is a concealer. As it reveals, it conceals, like every garment. You need the garment because you need to somewhat channel and protect the flow, that it should be done in the proper way. Like when you say levushim of seichel, when you explain something with examples, you dress it up in garments. The garments on one hand are necessary to bring it down a level, but they, in the process, they're also concealing the raw intensity of the original level. So nehi is a levush hamaylim. Ubchinas nihi de ima hamislapshim bezeh. Zeu rak b'chinas hakelim la'achar sha'eres de ima mistalkim mehem. Let me just say mislapshim bezeh. Let me just read this properly. Nihi de ima nasim mechel zeh. B'teich mislapshim nesel to Abba. Good. B'chinas nihi de ima. B'chinas nihi de ima hamislapshim bezeh. Okay, you have to say it means like this. And nihi de ima, in which is mislabish, netzach and hoid of Abba. You could also say mislabish and meichin of zah, but I think it means what I just said. So he says, zeu, he's explaining, this is the level, zeu rak b'chinas hakelim, la'achar sha'eres de ima mistalkim mehem. Then when you're talking about nehi de ima, what's left is the kelim, which is essentially the implementation and actualization of the oir of Binah that was involved in the process. So in other words, when you're already now establishing, let's go back to the Gemara, to Nigla de Torah. When you find in the Gemara, let's say a whole discussion in the Mishnah Gemara, there's a discussion around a certain issue, is something kosher or not kosher. And they argue back and forth. This is all Binah at work. That's ima. It has chachma within it because that's the kernel of the idea. But Binah is developing, and they're arguing this way and that way. And you have not come to a conclusion yet. Now you're ready to say, this moichin is all about coming to a psak din. It's like a bezdin, a court of law, sitting. They heard all the arguments of two sides, and now they have to have a ruling. So they sit and argue about it. So they argue, they mefalpul. They discuss it, they analyze it, they argue, back and forth, back and forth. Then all that is moichin shayochem lemidus. But when they're ready to come to Psak, what's happening? All the ideas that they were developing now get distilled and so-called directed and channeled into Nehi of Binah. So what you're left with is the Kelim, like he says, La'achar sha'eres the ima mistalkim mehem. They're mistaleh because now when you're going to give the ruling, even though you can give the reasons for the ruling, but the whole back end of all the ideas that were discussed are somewhat concealed right now. They're like removed. And now they come and write and say, here, after a long deliberation, we come to the decision that this is kosher. And therefore, it can be elevated as is. This sukkah is kosher. This animal is kosher. Or the opposite is posel, or treif, or tameh, like he said, or zakai, or zakai, or chayev. So that final conclusion is nihi de binah, which which in turn is going to become moichin of zah, of these midas, of the actual psak. But behind that is the Binah, the earnest of Binah are mistalik, and what's coming is only the kalim after the earnest of being mistalik. So you have all these different levels, and this, he says, this translates into when we look now in the Piskei Halachos and Shisa Shida Mishnah. Then you have the midas, the meichel sheba. Yeah, got it. Midas, good. Like he writes in Eitz Chaim, Shar HaMoichin Peri Gimel, in the section called Shar HaMoichin, the Gate of Moichin, chapter 3, Bepirish Maimer Razal, he comes to explain there a Maimer Razal, a statement in the Talmud by the sages. What is the statement? Ein ha-Torah miskayemes ela b'mi shememis atzmei. Aleha. It doesn't say the word aleha. The Torah is not sustained, is not preserved, except by someone who's ready to memis atzmei, someone who's ready to die for it. In other words, if you study it superficially or just as an academic exercise, it won't be preserved or sustained. Miskayemes means something that is permanently sustained is when someone who dies for it. It doesn't mean physically die, obviously. He means that it's negei benefesh. You learn it in a way that it's as if it's your life and death. It's that important to you. So therefore, it's internalized and it becomes etched inside the very human being. So memis atzmei. The Torah, so he explains, what does the Eitz Chaim say? So the Eitz Chaim explains, the Torah he b'china zah. Torah is the level of zah. Shu Torah shebiksav. That's the written Torah. V'hakim shaloi heina moichin, and the preservation and the sustainability of this zah of Torah shebiksav is moichin, is the mind. The eina Torah yochel iskayim liyaslei moichin el al yidei bina. And the Torah cannot be preserved or sustained in a way that it should have these moichin, which means that this immersion of the mind involved only through Binah. Hanikra mi keneda. So Eitz Chaim is teaching when he says Ela b'mi shemei misatzmei, he's focusing on the word mi, not just the mei misatzmei, which is the complete commitment to it, but mi, someone. What is mi? Mi is the level of Binah. So in other words, the Torah needs, Zah needs Binah in order to be miskayemes. So in other words, if you only had Torah sitting in a Sefer Torah in an ark, when you read it from time to time, it's not the way you preserve Torah. Torah needs meichin. You need someone sitting and learning it and using their minds. And for that to be sustainable, it's only through Binah mi, the level of mi. Because Binah, Chachma itself, most likely, I don't know if he's going to say it here, but Chachma itself is only a spark. It's a nekuda. The real place where Torah gets sustained is when you see people sitting in a beis medrash, in a yeshiva, and they're learning and they're immersed in it hours and hours, and they're poring over its pages. Then it's a living Torah. And what level is that? That's Binah. So in other words, there's the Torah Zah, it's a holy Torah, written Torah, but now you need someone to learn it, but learn it properly, meimis atzmei, in a real committed way. So this is the level of Binah. Asher hi meimisa atzmo b'shvil Torah. This level of Binah is dying, is killing itself over Torah. I know it's a strong word. It comes from the word misa, but he means here, of course, dying in a good way. That it's indispensable. That it's ready to die for it. It's so committed to it that it's like I can't live without it. Hi chayenu ve'erech yameinu. Now we usually do, we say someone says, I'm dying to eat a steak. I'm dying to drink something. I'm dying from hunger. These are euphemisms, it's just expressions, but you want to bring out that you really want it very strongly. So the expression here is that same thing. That it's not optional, and it's not optional. It's a necessity. So he's saying this is the level that Binah, the level of me, me miso atzmo b'shvil haTorah. So when a Jew is sitting and learning Torah in a way that is like doing it in a way that's with his whole life is giving to it toward it, like we say b'chol ma'idecha, which we're going to learn soon. V'chol ma'adecha is that level. You're not just doing it with your heart and with your soul, but you're ready to die for it. You're completely consumed with it. He says that's what the Eitz Chaim is saying, an Eina Torah Miskayemes. Ki nehi shala, she's explaining further, because the nehi of Binah, mistalki ma'era shala. Oh, I didn't finish. I explained it. I jumped the gun a bit. He's actually, Eitz Chaim explains also what means misa here. I explained it as commitment. I thought that was the pshat. So that was my own additional explanation. I didn't realize that he's going to explain it himself here. So you can strike what I said, or it's only an addition. What I said is not a contradiction, but he's going to say like this. The Eitz Chaim continues. Why is it called misa? Me misa atzma? Because it's losing something in the process, like a death. Ki nehi shala mistalki ma'era shala. We just said that as a person is learning and bringing it down and bringing that Torah into the lower levels, the Eiris are mistalkim shala. V'nisharim kimesim kelim bli atzomis. The guf bli neshama. They remain like dead ones. They remain lifeless, like kelim without eir. Atzomis here means, atzomis could also mean bones, but it means here the kelim without their energy, and like a body without a soul. And Binah is ready to do that. It's ready to so-called compromise itself, which we still need to explain. Why does it have to be nostalgic? But we'll get to that. I'll get back to that in a moment. Let me just finish reading. And he does this b'shvil ha-Torah, because the commitment is so strong to Torah, you're ready to basically allow part of yourself to so-called expire. B'shvil ha-Torah shu zah, kedei sheyalbishu b'teicha meichin shem akiyum shalei. In order to enclose, to manifest the meichin, which is the preservation and the sustenance of the Torah. V'hainu, this means sha'eres hen shel zah atzmei. That means that the eres should be of zah itself. Okay. 1 minute. Now let me read a little more and then I'm going to explain. V'yesh leimer, and we can say, shezeu ma shameichin mishapchim benasim mohus midah. This is where the meichin are transformed and they become like the personality of the midah. U'kamoshin is bar le'il, as we explained, as we learned earlier. V'zeu sha'eres hem zah atzmei. So now the eres are coming from zah itself, and not from the deeper levels of meichin, but from zah itself. Okay. Now let's explain what this means. And I see that he continues to explain, but let me say it right now because it can be a little confusing. What's going on here exactly? Why does Binah have to lose something in order to be able to mislabish in zah in the Torah? So he's going to explain shortly that there's levels in intelligence. When a person's using their mind, let's start from the beginning. Basically, intellectual experience really defies emotions. When you're really involved in your mind, you don't want to have connection with anybody. Like I mentioned a number of times, we learned that when you're busy learning, someone comes over to you, it's a distraction. So generally, moichin itself is very, internal and very isolating. When you're learning something, yes, you can learn with a chavrusa, but the intellectual process itself is inward, not outward. If you're busy being mashpia and teaching or taking care or guiding and this, it's beautiful, but you cannot be immersed in your deepest ideas at the time. I remember more than once, by Fabring and the Rebbe saying, he had some complaint about something that was not done. So he said he doesn't understand why he's coming down to Fabringen to teach. He could sit in his room and just learn Torah, and everybody can do the same, and we don't have to bother each other. Matren einen den zwei. I mean, obviously there was harsh words that were not to accept, it was hard to hear, but he was basically, I'm just using it as an example. So a person who's a big Talmid Chacham, pure mind is actually not about relationships. It's about going into the ideas of something. Now, the only reason a person would commit themselves to teach is because it's not about me. It's not about me and my understanding. It's a certain Mesidus Nefesh. Like when the Rebbe agreed to become a Rebbe, in many ways, he could have stayed in his own privacy as a private citizen, learned Torah, and reached his greatest heights. Or when the words of the Rebbe once said about the Frierdiker Rebbe, that look at the Mesidus Nefesh, that instead of sitting in Europe or in Russia and learning and teaching Chassidus, the deepest levels of Chassidus, the Frierdiker Rebbe is involving himself with teaching Ayin Beis to children by establishing the Moses, and this was all an immersion. So God forbid, we're not saying that it's not important, but there's a certain giving up something. You're compromising so-called your own inner, deeper growth of your own intellectual pursuits, even in Torah, in order to bring it down to halacha. So what he's saying is like this, that when it's Torah itself sitting in a ark, in the Aron Kodesh is beautiful. But when a person, Neshama is like he says, Meimis Atzma, if you want the preservation of Torah, and you want its sustenance, and you want it to perpetuate, there you need, it's only Niskayemes, but me, Shemeimis Atzma, by Binah, immersing yourself in Binah, in a point that Binah is, in a sense, understanding it all, but then so-called shedding its deeper understanding in order to translate it into Torah and halacha, into the midas of Zah, like we said, kasha, pasal, chesed, and gvura. And in the process, something is dying in the process. What is dying? That when you're doing that, you can be involved in your own, first of all, in your own understanding in general, but even in the deeper understanding, because you're bringing it into the Torah, and in order to bring the Torah alive. So essentially, the person who's learning is killing themselves so the Torah should be able to be preserved. Another way of putting it, if you wish. So it's like a Mesidus Nefesh for the Torah, and that's what he says, Meimis Atzma, that because, but also on intellectual level, you're giving up the higher levels of intellect. Meimis Atzma Shol Torah Kinishol Mistalkim Ha'eres Shelo Minisharim Kemesim Kleilim B'li Atzomas V'Guf B'li Neshama V'Esekem B'Shvil HaTorah Shuzah, in order that in Torah should be this meichin, which is the preservation and the perpetuation and the sustenance of the Torah. And now the Eiris are no longer the Eiris of Binah, because that was nostalgic. It's the Eiris of Zah. In other words, you have given away yourself and your mind to Torah. So instead of your understanding Torah, you've given your understanding to Torah and made Torah come alive. So in a way, Torah here is a makabel, as we're soon going to learn. Why is it a makabel? Because when a teacher dedicates his life, not to just growing in his own mind, but he's dedicated with Mesidus Nefesh to his students, he means I'm foregoing my own Eiris, the Eiris of Binah, in order to give the Eiris to Zah, to the children. In this case, the child is the Torah, the student. In this, the makabel, that's Meimis Atzma that he's saying here. So that's essentially what he's saying. How so the meichin are mishapich, instead of being on the level of meichin. Before we were learning how midas are elevated to the level of meichin. That was shalach tishlach as a aim. But when the aim is revetzes alabonim, and the aim is coming, and the bina is coming to preserve, protect. In this case, it's Torah. Then it's a Mesidus Nefesh that preserves Torah. Your moichin belong to your students and to your children, and not to you. And that is the Mesidus Nefesh that happens here. So the moichin, the Eiris, become Eiris of Zah, instead of being Eiris of Ima, of Bina. And from Bina, it's only in the He, and the He is a concealer over those Eiris that were essentially concealed, or like he says, he calls it actually like a death, which means the neshama of them is reseated, and right now they're the Eiris of, he says clearly, Eiris hem Zah atzmei. Okay, he's going to explain this now further, but I want to stop if anybody wants to ask anything. Fascinating piece. Very fascinating. Wow.
I think.
See, again, it's very brief and needs to be elaborated upon. Yeah. Yeah.
I think what I'm getting from this is that just like when the Chachamim are discussing or debating it, and then they finally come to a resolution of psak, now they're interested is the psak being fulfilled. They're no longer the intricate discussions that recedes into the background. Now I'm interested in the psak, which is like Mesiras Nefesh for the union of the psak, or another way of looking at it. Right?
That's another way of putting it. Yeah, that's a correct way of putting it. It basically is the difference between, am I understanding the Torah, or is my whole understanding for the Torah and its preservation and perpetuation,
Yes, it's really very interesting. It's sort of like what the Rabbi did for us. He could learn a whole 24 hours a day, but at his levels, but he decided to give a Mesiras Nefesh of his own, or else to give over to his afrochim, his children, so to speak, so that we could mekayim hamaisul iker rather than the discussions. Okay, thank you.
I think it's all included, and probably there's other. I mean, I was going to mention Simchas Torah, but it's a little different because Simchas Torah you're not learning; it's not a psak. But in a sense, when you dance with the Torah, you're giving up your understanding of the Torah to dance with it. In other words, it's like your love. It's not just I understand you, but I also I'm dancing. I become your legs. I become your feet to dance with you. It's a little similar, but not mamish, because there's not a process of learning and halachas and the midas, but the same idea where a person is. The Frierdiker Rebbe has an expression that there's two ways you shouldn't just learn Torah, but you should. He says the words Nishno lernen Torah, nor Torah soll dir lernen. Not only should you learn Torah, but Torah should teach you. Now, it's not just I'm here and I'm learning Torah, but it's also teaching. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? If not, I'll just read, because there's more to this. He didn't finish the topic. He's going to say more that I think will help understand this better even. Okay. V'zehu she'amar Zal. I will say one more thing. I remember when the Rebbe spoke once, there's halacha in the Rambam. It's halacha about Arei Miklat. When a person has to escape to a city of refuge because they accidentally killed someone. So it says, Maglin Rabbi Imoy, that when a Talmud is sent off to Golos, Maglin Rabbi Imoy, that his teacher is sent with him. And of course, the question is, 1 second, what's going on? The teacher didn't do anything wrong. But the teacher is so defined and identified with the student, like Shchinta Begalusa, that when the student needs the teacher goes where the student is. Even though you usually think the other way around, the student should go where the teacher is. But that's the dedication. The teacher is ready to sacrifice himself for the benefit of his students. It's like his child. And it just came to mind when we're reading this type of so the moichin, the oidas become oidas of Zah, of the student, in this case, the Torah, and this is what Razal say, Rabbeinu Zachrein Revlach, our teachers, our sages say, Nevlas Chachma Shalamaylo Torah. Nevlas are the droppings of Chachma above. It's like when a tree, like in the fall, when the leaves are falling from the tree. So these are like droppings. So it says Torah is the droppings of Chachma. It's a very bizarre statement. To define Torah as droppings. Torah is Torah. But he calls it Nevlas Chachma Shalamayla Torah. We learned about this, I believe, in volume 1 for sure. So a few times it was mentioned. Okay. So he explained, Torah, Shalamayla Torah. The Chachma HaMislabeshes B'midas, because Torah, which is Chachma that comes down into Midas, it's not just academic exercise. It's Chachma that's negated to kosher, apostle, chesed, gvura, etc. So Chachma is B'midas, who b'chinas nevlis bolvad. That's only droppings compared to Chachma itself. In other words, Chachma Satera, the way it is in its root, that's a very high exalted level. The way Torah comes into Midas, like he says, the Moichin Mistabeshes, Chachma Mistabeshes B'midas, Those are only droppings compared to the etzem hachachma. Ligaba atzmus hachachma. Compared to the core of chachma, shehi bechinas kodesh. Kadesh, mila begameh. So there's kadesh and kodesh. Kadesh, mila begameh means you don't need another word. Kadesh is an identity of its own. It's completely removed from everything. That's chachma. It's removed. But when chachma becomes shaykh lemidus, which means the chachma is being applied to halachas, like we're speaking, to midas of chesed and gvura, then it's only droppings. So it's not, God forbid, he's not trying to say Torah is a negative, only a dropping. It says compared to atzmis hachachma, the Torah that shaykh lemidus, the chachma shaykh to midas, what we're discussing here are called droppings. You're only getting an external part, which is the mesiras nefesh, of course. I'm thinking about it in a few ways. I wanted to just throw in a few things. Like when the Rebbe pushed people to become rabbonim. So there were those that said to the Rebbe, I'd rather just sit and learn and koilel. Why do I have to become an actual Rav? When you're an actual Rav, obviously you continue learning, but a lot of your learning then is all about really dealing with people and their questions. Yes, you have some time on your own, but you can't sit and learn all day just on your own. You have to deal with realities on the ground where Torahs are being applied to dealing with things, to real action, to halachas, to arguments, to questions, to doubts, which is called birur halacha. When you ask a shaila by a rav, or you have a disagreement, or you want to clarify things. But so the point was, what is Torah going? How could Torah be preserved if everybody was just sitting and learning? If Moshe Rabbeinu decided to stay on Mount Sinai, or decided to stay in his own tent, and then not teach anyone, what would we have had? He had to bring in Aaron, the whole process, and then Aaron and his sons, and then the fourth time, the rest of the Zkanim. It was a whole process of going downward, so to speak, lech reid, as he said, to go downward and be mashpia. The Alter Rebbe in his introduction to Tanya, a very powerful line right in the beginning, the Rebbe quotes it a lot, where he says, after he says that in Tanya you'll find all the answers, and then he says, and if you don't find the answer, please go to the Gedalim Shebe'ir, go to the leaders or the mature ones, as I interpret it, of the city, and have them explain it. Have them explain it to you. And then the Alter Rebbe makes a bakosha, a personal request. He says, and those that can help, don't be menei bar, don't hold back the sustenance, and please help them. And then he adds, meir einei shneim havaya. And when you do, God will illuminate both your eyes. And the Rebbe points out that when you do it, even though initially it seems like you're going away from your own high level of your own learning, but ultimately that will add and increase that illumination from Hashem because you helped. The idea of being mashpia, essentially. So just since we're talking about it, let me just tell it in the context. Remember once on Purim, the Rebbe spoke about the last psukim in the Megillah. So it says that that Mordechai, what's the lashon there? That he was Mordechai was accepted by Reiv HaChachamim. I forgot the exact lashon. Mordechai in the Megillah. It doesn't say that all his colleagues embraced him. It says most of them embraced him. Now remember, Mordechai remained in the king's court in order to obviously help the Jewish people and help save their lives. So the question is, why Reiv? Why not all? The Reiv Echav. So the Rebbe explains it with a beautiful story with the Ragat Shover. The Ragat Shover Gaon was once invited in Dvinsk, wherever he was. They wanted him to become part of the Vad HaKol, part of the communal, leadership. And the Ragat Shover declined, saying, you're forcing me to have to make a decision between a machlekes between Bavli and Yerushalmi. His cryptic way. And then later, when asked or explained, what does he mean? So the Bavli and the Shami, there's a statement, both of them have a statement, but there's a distinction. It says, somebody who gets involved in communal matters, an activist. So it says, in the Bavli, it says, Hatera mishtameres. The Torah that he has will be protected. In the Yerushalmi, it says, Hatera mizbareches. his Torah will be blessed. Mishtameres means you're not going to go down a level. It'll be preserved. In other words, because you dedicated your life to helping others and activism, so it'll be protected. But the Yerushalmi says more, it'll be blessed, which means your Torah will grow. Even though you may not be learning all the time, but because you're helping others, similar to the concept of tzedakah is the elef pamim kocha. It's what's the word there? Tzedakah is that tzedakah causes a person to be able to achieve 1,000 times more. And the Rebbe says 1,000 means literally. So the Ragachover was saying, by inviting me, you're causing me to go into this machlekes, because by learning, according to the Bavli, I won't grow. According to the Shalmi, I will grow. So I don't want to get involved in this machlekes, and therefore he declined from the job. The point is, that's why Mordechai was rotzei l'reiv echav, not all, because some saw that ultimately Mordechai's Torah would not grow. It would not go down, but it wouldn't grow. That's the point. So what you see from this is that Osuk b'tzarchit tzibur does have the element here of Mesiras Nefesh. You're giving up something. According to the Yerushalmi, you're blessed in return. But the point is that it is an element of some sacrifice involved. That's all I wanted to just throw into the whole picture here. So now we explained why it's Nevles Chochmah Shalamayla. It's only like droppings because it's not the Etzem HaChochmah. And now the next piece, I'll just read a line or two, but now he's going to go back because he's all setting the stage here to explain why Neshamas Malchus is elevating to the level of Binah, Ima. Imi, that's Mashpia and Torah. Not just it's learning Torah, but it's being Mashpia and Torah. She says, Aval Neshamas B'shoshen Hem Ba'atzmus HaChochmah. The souls in their root are in the core of Chochmah. L'mayla ma'at-Torah. They're higher than Torah. Like he said, Torah is Zoh. Ukiyadua ha'maimer, the Tanad Ve'elyo. Like it's known, the statement in Tanad Ve'elyo is a medrash. Shnei dvarim kodmu le'elam. Two things preceded the world. Torah v'Yisrael. Torah and Israel, the Neshamas of Israel. And then he continues, the medrash. Elyo. Ve'eni yedeya eze mehem kodem. And he doesn't know, or it says Aini, I don't know, or it's not known. We know two things preceded the world, but which one preceded which? Is it Torah preceded Yisrael or Yisrael Torah? Both preceded the world, but which one precedes which? Until it says, he says, Oimerani Yisrael Kodma. I say that Israel, Yisrael, the Neshamas precede Torah. Vaharaya lezeh, and what's the proof? How do you know? Shari b'Torah nemar, because in the Torah it says, Savez b'nei Yisrael, command the children of Israel, daber al b'nei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel. So the fact that the Torah, it says, command, that means the Torah was given for Eden. So it is to command to them, speak to them. It doesn't say, Jews, listen to the Torah. It says, to the Torah, Tzav. That means that the Jews, the Shamas, so Emerani Yisrael Kodme. How do Yisrael Kodme? That means that first there's Yisrael, then comes Torah and says, command this to the Bnei Yisrael. Tell it to them. Nimtzu, so that from this they derive, Shanashamas Kodme L'Torah, that souls precede Torah. V'hainu, which means Shagam B'Sharshim HaMekedim, I've turned the page, 1252, that also in their source, in their root and their source, like in the primordial thought of Adam Kadmon, the highest world, the root of souls. In other words, it's not just in Atzilus on lower levels, but also in the highest levels, that the root of Neshamas precedes the root of Torah. I'm going to stop here because the next section he continues is all more at length about it. But basically, he's setting the stage of talking about how Jews are mashpia in Torah, and not just are using the Torah to develop the midas of Torah, like Achesi. He's leading to understanding the idea of imi, but we're not there yet. And due to time, We're going to stop here. So I'm stopping at the top of page 1252, right in the middle of the discussion of Yisrael and Neshamas being higher than Torah. And then we're going to have the Neshamas coming down to Torah, to be mashpia into Torah, as we learned. But it's not over yet, so we have, yeah. Okay, so we're stopping here, top of page 1252. Are there any questions